we're going to be talking about work.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, and it just seems to be one of those topics. I mean, we spend it seems like a third of our adult lives right now, like at least, right? And work weeks have gotten longer and longer. And I'm at an age, I'm in my late 30s now, where we start to think about, what our legacy, and what are we going to leave behind, and what do we want to be remembered for, and what is my time worth? And so I'm excited to talk to you because you have had multiple journeys within the land of work, and you've recently just made this other passageway when you've moved from that place of, where you have a title and a job description and, money coming in because of the labors that you're doing, into the land of you're free to choose your own, what's your time and your labors and your titles, and how you want to be, how you value your energies. And so can you speak a little bit just to how that transition has been, to going from working in the ministry for 37 years to the land of retirement, and what that's been like for you?
So thinking about this conversation, I've been reacquainting myself with Ivan Illich. He's dead now. I think he died in 2002. He was a radical Catholic priest, and he was quite a philosopher and thinker, and spent much of his time thinking about work and the access to the necessities of life and schooling, and how we train our children so they'll have access to the necessities of life. And so his starting point for the conversation really is the understanding that all human beings work and want to work and want to contribute. It's built into who we are. We're born into families, and if we're lucky, we're loved, and people work and share. And when we're little children, before we get to be gnarly and contrarian, we want to help mom, we want to help dad, we want to do what they do, because it's built into who we are. And when we think of work in our society, though, we usually think of paid employment and schooling, to a great degree. The institution of education in our country and around the world really adapts us to working for money, to working jobs that people will pay us for. And then if we can work a job that we get paid for, then we have access to what we need. And the difficult thing about that is, as societies get larger and more complex, the kind of work that you can do to get paid so you have access for what you need it gets called work. I work. And then there's status with that. And there's a position in society. Now, not everybody has to work to have that position. If you have amassed a certain amount of wealth, and that's where I am now. I wish it were more wealth that I had amassed. I've said this before, but when my dad died, a week before he died, he said, "How much money do we have left, Bryan?" And I said, "Pop, you got $1,100. He said, "I'm cutting it pretty close, aren't I?" I said, "Yeah, yeah."
Oh, I love that.
But we have the way our system is set up. in a complex society, we equate work with paid work, but in fact, all of us work. And then trouble comes in this way. Recently, in the last 500 years, white Europeans have come to America. Previous to the white European conquest and colonization of the Americas, there was no unemployment. Everybody worked. And the work of their hands accrued to them directly. So people made baskets, and they made stone tools. They made pottery, created boats and dwelling places, and there was no homelessness because they made their home. And that is work in the Garden of Eden. That's work the way it's supposed to be. That's work the way we human beings need to work. And there's all kinds of work that occurs in a natural condition. And we have various skills. Some of the work contributes materially, and other the work contributes spiritually. It's relational work. And the relationship can be within ourselves or among ourselves or to a larger group. We create a society. That's relational work, and how you make decisions together, and people who have the ability to lead us to working to cooperative, collaborative work together. That's relational work. And so we human beings, we all work. Some of us get paid and some of us don't. The most important work in the world is raising our children. That is the most important work, to raise our children so they have a sense of who they are and what they can contribute and how they can work. So Ivan Illich says, okay, we're a long way from there, sisters and brothers. We're a long way from there.
It's interesting because, I wrote down, Eden work as you were talking, and I think it's really, as a mother, as someone who, has spent the last, 5 or so years where the bulk of my labors have been for my child, for my family, unpaid labor. I realize I kind of carry, there's almost like there's an inherited trauma. I have my own mother. I remember her. There was this constant push-pull in our family where you could tell that she had chosen very deliberately to be a mother. She wanted that position. She wanted to fulfill that role. But there was kind of a battle waging within her as well, because she was, had been trained as a classical musician. She's very gifted. And there was this feeling like, if I hadn't stepped into the role of motherhood, could I have really done something with myself? And so sometimes there was even this feeling amongst us, me and my sister, like we're holding her back, like we're this lesser work, where she's not able to fully, step into her calling and her potential because her, ungrateful, constant needing children need stuff all the time, and she's not able to fulfill her calling as a musician. And I know for myself, I think for years there was this feeling that I felt a great isolation as a mother, because there's just so little status, even though we acknowledge to some degree that it's important work, right? There's this feeling, I think, in a lot of us where we desire to have money coming in from our efforts. We desire to have a title that people look at and say, oh, you're a such and such. Wow, cool. And they understand your place in the world. And it's taken me years of kind of moving and sitting with that, I mean, maybe trauma is too strong a word, but that kind of modeling, that conditioning to be like, no, like you say, this is important labor, and I choose to assign it my own value and my own worth, even if the larger culture demeans what I do with most of my time. So I wanted to interject that because I really you do such a beautiful job of reminding those of us that maybe feel less status in the world, that we're doing something meaningful. So thank you.
It is very, very real. When I was a young man, I taught school. My then spouse was staying home, but actually she did not have the skills to be happy or really effective as a stay-at-home mom. She was a high-powered intellectual person with really good institutional skills. And long story short, she ended up having a long career at the University of California, Berkeley, working with student loans and just terrific work. But so she was really unhappy. This is an aside. She would not have been happy being a country farm wife, retired in Oregon,
Yeah.
canning pears and beans and cracking and roasting walnuts. Edie's died and gone to heaven. Speaking of work, since coming to Oregon, Edie has just spent hours and hours in the kitchen. She's in the kitchen right now, working, doing work that she does not get paid for, but it's in her skill set. And also in her skill set this afternoon at 2:00, she's going into McMinnville for her third art lesson. She is just a natural artist, but she hasn't had an opportunity to develop it since she was a young woman. She spent some time in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and so she has multi talents. But now what we're talking about is sacred labors. These are sacred labors, and her absolute love of canning and cooking. Oh my gosh. So we were talking skill sets and we're talking labor. And so my previous spouse was not meant to be a stay-at-home parent. And, I can do that. So I did for a year. I stopped teaching. I stayed at home. So now we're talking about the trauma of our society. I felt it. I mean, it was, I get up in the morning and look in the mirror and shave and say, damn, I used to be somebody. And now the women in the neighborhood were really kind. They let me join the mothers group. I was the only guy in the mothers group. But how important was it? And so you were talking about isolation. I mean, I was isolated, except I had the mothers group. And we did weekly outings with the kids. We'd take them to the park or take them up to the river or take them to some little, play activity in town. And so the building of the work of building supportive community was involved there. But I did that for a year. Then I went back to work and we paid somebody then to take care of our kids. We had childcare come in because my former spouse then got involved in administration in the school district where I was. And who we are, we're just in relationship to a system. And now this is an interesting part because I began talking about labor in North America previous to colonization. And my God, everybody worked and everybody, it accrued to them. And then the Northern Europeans came, and so they brought the trauma with them because they were not living in harmony. They were not living in Eden. And they came in with an industrial approach to farming and to the creation of goods. And it was not living in harmony with nature. But they also brought with them this notion labor that you get paid for and labor that you don't. There was so much labor that was needed, particularly in the South, but even in the North in the beginning. What they did was, they didn't pay people to take care of their kids. They had slaves. Slavery was built in, and in defense of Northern Europeans, pretty much all societies eventually have some kind of slavery, or have had. But boy, it was institutionalized in a huge way, obviously, in the Americas. That slavery model, with slavery, you're not a full person. According to the early arrangements, you were 2/3 of a person, though the old language used to be thought to be inclusive when it said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That really didn't mean men at that point, and it meant white men with property. And we've expanded that, thank goodness. The way our system works, and I do not want to denigrate all the good things in our system, but there's that huge slavery thing at the bottom. And then what our economy found was, not only was it inhumane to keep people in chattel slavery, it was also really expensive because you had to take care of people. I mean, you had to house them and feed them. And I mean, it was like they were treated as if they were mules or horses or oxen, but still you had to feed them, you had to take care of them, and you had an investment in them. And so absolutely on humanitarian grounds, slavery was abolished. But on economic grounds, what happened is we chased the pea around the plate and we began wage slavery. And the way our economy works, and this is worldwide, we want to have things be, we want labor as inexpensive as possible. And the idea is we want goods that are inexpensive, but what it is, it's the hidden cost of what it does to human beings and the planet to have goods be inexpensive. But our education system then trains people to work so they can have a kind of skill that they will get paid for. And increasingly, just the basic human skills, the relational skills, the things we were talking about, art, music, caring, really teaching people to think clearly and stuff, those things are really not valued by our society. And now as we get more technological, we really, in our economy, we need people to be able to tend to our robots and our artificial intelligence machines, and the rest of the people who can't work, don't work, are not valuable in our society. And it's an increasing number. I mean, around the country, the huge surge of people displaced from our society and out on the streets and living now throwback to the way people lived close to the ground before the Europeans came, except now the work of their hands cannot even accrue to them. They can't build a little shelter and have that shelter them anymore, because they're going to come with a bulldozer and just drive that little thing over. And the message is inhuman and it's inhumane, but the message to people is, you fit into our system and you make yourself convenient for the way we do paid work, or please get out of the way and die quick. One of the side effects of the way paid work actually operates in our society is that as the things that we get paid for narrow down, the anxiety increases, the trauma increases. And to accept this system, we learn to accept trauma. Now, there's metaphors for this. A big expose in Sports Illustrated, which I'm confident that you read every day.
Absolutely.
But a big expose about the abusive world of competitive and professional hockey, and how one guy who's now 34 years old, and I've forgotten what team he played for, but he came out and he has created a PTSD program for hockey players and other professional athletes who, now you can get it here direct, how hard they work. That's a kind of work. It's a kind, I mean, it could be just enjoyment, but it's a kind of work. It's a way to get paid for what you can do with your body. And it's so inhumane that there's a whole kind of hazing that happens that's really cruel and unusual. A lot of it physical, but some of it even sexual hazing. Mm-hmm. And what happens is you learn to accept that as just, well, that's just reality. That's just the way it is. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And you learn to accept it as reality, so you're convenient for the machine.
Yeah. I feel like
And
we see this in a lot of how the tech industry is kind of continuing this almost psychotic propensity towards overwork, because now we have this, we're always available. We've normalized, like, and not that it compares to, physical, psychological abuse, but there's this almost kind of deadening of our ability to see what is natural and what is normal, to our own biorhythms, because now we have this, like 24-hour clock, and you can work from anywhere, and you can work all hours. And, and meanwhile, people within that industry get paid an insane amount and drive up prices and the, real estate prices where they live. And I guess it's just, as far as the culture of work goes, I feel like that has gone into so many industries, where inhumane is just becoming the new normal almost. We're being pretty well conditioned out of our humanity, it seems like.
that is true. And so the anxiety that is produced because of that certainly seeps into families. And I think it is, well, it's prevalent everywhere. I think it's probably more intense in urban California than it was in Maine when we were there. But the drive to get our kids to perform, and the anxiety about what school they're going to go to and what skills they're going to get, so they're going to be able to sell their labor so they have their needs met. And then selling their labor in that way is called work, and they have access to a few of their needs, but it gets increasingly difficult to do that, as you were just saying. So we have tools now, people can work all the time and figure out the hourly wage. It wouldn't be that much then, because you're working 24/7. But meanwhile, such anxiety, parents are, I was ambitious for my children, ambitious in the sense of I wanted them to fit in and go to good schools and all this. And this is where Ivan Illich starts. He said, man, we got to stop the indoctrination. We got to change the system. He calls it deschooling. Deschooling in terms of ending the programming of our kids for this. He said, many people, especially those who are poor, intuitively know what schools do for them. Schools teach them to confuse going to school with learning. Once these two concepts become blurred, a new logic is assumed. The more you go to school, the better person you are. Going to school equals learning. Getting good grades means you're educated. Earning a diploma means you're competent. Speaking and writing correct English fluently means you have something worthwhile to say. People's imagination is schooled to accept commodities in the place of values. Medical treatment is mistaken for healthcare. Social work is mistaken for the improvement of community life. Police protection is mistaken for community safety. Military power is mistaken for national security. The rat race of a paid job is mistaken for valuable work. So I like this guy.
Yeah.
His thinking begins to shine a light on the system that we have built around paid work, confusing it with the work that we all do. Paid work being, if you can make yourself compliant enough and competent enough in what the market wants for a competitive price, then you can have status as a real person. Otherwise, all the work you do don't mean squat. So that's not the only way. I mean, if you're the idle rich, well, you have worked hard and you deserve it.
Right.
If you're the idle poor and you're a mother and you're a single mom, get your lazy butt out of the house and get a job.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't make enough to pay for your darn childcare if you have a job, never mind your house. And it's so infused in our society that if we're not careful, and I'm with everybody else. I'm not as careful and mindful as I need to be. But we will sit and we'll listen to politicians who promote the myth because you listen to our politicians and they will say, hardworking Americans. Well, excuse me. I absolutely believe a country full of hardworking people. And many of them just got kicked out of the Palco Marsh. And some of those people actually have paid jobs. They just don't make enough to house themselves. Yeah. And some of the people are just not considered worthy because they don't fit in for the system, for the paid slavery system. So it's really tough and painful for us to take a look at this. And now just back to my situation, I worked for pay, but still, it was an honor. It was a respected position to be a paid minister. And I was a paid minister. I worked with congregations. And so now I'm not, and I'm thrown back to, well, who am I and how do I work? Part of my work now continues to be ministry. My brother and his wife lost a son to heroin addiction, and then lost a grandson at about age 2.5 or 3 to a seizure disorder. Part of my work now is to just walk with my brother and sister-in-law. They live here. We moved up here because we love them and they're close, but it's part of my work. And we don't work in isolation. It's communion. Part of my brother Jack's work is that he helps me with house projects because that's totally out of my wheelhouse. I don't know how to do anything with tools. Yeah. And so he comes and shares with me his skills, and then I can listen to him. He can talk to me about, out of the blue, just breaking down and crying with the grief that overwhelms him. That's sacred work. That's sacred work. I mean, his work for me is sacred too, because I can't do that stuff.
And so what you describe, so I mean, son, it's beautiful, right? It's, the ability to show up and offer what your innate gifts are, to a beloved, or to a fellow community member. And I feel like I have amassed a certain amount of privilege in my own life, through just, virtue of, where I was able to be educated and born, the color of my skin, what have you. And it enables me to not have to work 40 plus hours a week simply for just, aspiring to, a lower middle class lifestyle, basically, and it speaks to me that it's like, so do we, it feels like there's this thing, this kind of notion that we're all working towards, like, well, someday, after you've achieved a certain amount of wealth, after you've achieved a certain amount of privilege, comfort, et cetera, somewhere in the future, you'll be able to reevaluate your relationship to time, your relationship to work, your relationship to wages, and you'll be able to do the things that you feel really called to. But first you have to slog through something that may be absolutely soul-sucking, through something that may be go against the better angels of your nature, that might be immoral, that might just feed into all the systems of oppression that you described, but you need to show up and provide for your family. And I'm curious if there's a way out before, like how do we start to, because I feel like there's something, like when you look at that hierarchy of needs, right? And, if the basic needs are not being met, or even just if they are, I feel like you can come into such a slumber when you're in that grind of paid work, that you can't even wake up to what it would look like to use your time and your gifts in a way that feels like it's of service, in a way that feels like a calling, in a way that feels like it has value beyond just monetary. And I'm curious, just in your years of being with people and walking along them through their journeys, how do you help people? How do we start to make that shift from the sleep of the hypnotic nature of working for wages into engaging now in the lives we're living. You know, we still need to put food on the table, we still need to pay the mortgage, but how do we begin to shift our own internal value system so that we feel like right now I'm doing work that has meaning, even if I still need to, you know, pay the electric bill. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think that this kind of oppression has long been with us. People have had to survive in the midst of all the trauma that society produces, that a hierarchical society produces. My response to this was there are various ways to do it, but my response at age 33 was that I went to seminary. I was teaching school, and there are aspects of school teaching I really like. But as a school teacher, I was a good Unitarian Universalist minister, and I was not necessarily getting people down the road with drills and tests, and it's really important that you learn how to do that. So, I mean, that's a certain aspect of teaching. So I really wanted to do something different where I could work with the whole person, because in a school setting, you're supposed to keep it not too personal, and it's supposed to be you're working on drills and stuff, and you don't really talk about what things mean too much, because that's the job of the parent or the church or whatever. And so I wanted to get into a profession where I could talk about what the hell it means. And that's not the only way to do it. But then out of religious institution comes various approaches to how you live in a world where there's so much oppression. In Christian terms, it's called a broken world, but there it is. It's a world that is broken, and by God, we're continuing to break it with the way we do stuff. So you get the wisdom of the Buddha, who says, well, what you do is you understand the fourfold, or you understand the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And part of the Eightfold Path, is right view, and then right thought and right intention, and then right labor is part of it. That you involve yourself in a kind of labor that is at least marginally life-giving, and then we get compromised. So there was a nuclear physicist talking with Thich Nhat Hanh about right livelihood, about right labor. And he said, I just don't know what to do. Should I quit this? And Thich Nhat Hanh told the guy, he said, I can't tell you whether you should or you shouldn't. He said, but I can say, if you can put up with the work that you do, it might be really good to have a practicing Buddhist involved with nuclear physics and nuclear and the whole nuclear power thing. He said, so that's all. We live where we live, doing what we do. And then how do you sustain yourself with that? Well, with Unitarian Universalists, we have our mission, and it's a threefold mission. First, it's our own internal spirits that we attend to, and trying to embody our 7 principles and keep our own souls in balance. And then we build community, and we participate in community, which keeps our spirits alive, and we help other people keep their spirits alive, and they help us. And then we go out into the world and try to dismantle some of this brokenness, which is what we're involved with. So how do you live in the belly of the beast? Well, that's one way to do it. It ain't the only way. In Islam, you have the 5 pillars of Islam. So what do? You acknowledge that there is no God but Allah. And that's a deep theological thing. There ain't no reality but reality. There is no universe but the universe. Here it is. And you say, okay, and this is the experience that we have. And so we open our hearts to it and say, in here there can be goodness. And that's kind of the first pillar of Islam. But the second pillar is you pray 5 times a day. You keep yourself fast during Ramadan. That's a spiritual practice that people who practice that kind of fasting have told me, I've never fasted for a month in my life, but people who have practiced said there's a kind of spiritual clarity that comes with that practice that's really helpful. And then you do justice in the world. That's part of what it is, to have a just relationship in the world, and with yourself, with Allah, and with other people, and you work to create justice in the world, and you share from your wealth. That's a big part of it. And then the last step is you take a trip you make a Hajj, you take a pilgrimage to Mecca if you can. So, but those are various ways that people try to find balance in the midst of this, to both keep themselves alive, and then to understand that instead of paid work, maybe we want to move toward communion, where it's from you I receive, to you I give, together we share.
One thing that I have been learning, even though I don't get the direct benefit of learning it from you in person, I have been so lucky to have the mentorship of my friend, Therese, who received mentorship from you. And through her, a lot of your words and your wisdom and your teachings are kind of, they're moving forward even in your absence. And one thing that she has been sharing with me that just really, really resonates on such a deep level is how you talk about spiritual work. Because I think there's this, there's that element of sanctuary, of coming to our spiritual practices because they provide us that direct experience of grace, and that direct experience of kind of being held inside the warmth of the divine, however we define that. And so there's this feeling of sanctuary, but I sometimes as a culture think that we get stuck on the sweetness, right? Where we really, really want that reprieve. We want the sanctuary of spirituality, of spiritual practice, but we forget that there's this whole other piece of it, that spiritual practice it's all of it. It's the labors that we do. And so this is one thing that I have just loved receiving from you via Therese, this reminder that it's all spiritual work. If that's really your calling, your path, that, the washing of the dishes, the sweeping of the floor, the dealing with the difficult neighbor or community member, or, the picking up of the dog poo, whatever the thing is that's completely, irritating and non-grandiose, this is spiritual practice. And I don't know if you can open that up for me at all, but I just want to say that it's something that I feel called to again and again and again, because I think it's such a potent reminder, if we want to integrate the work and the energy of spirit into our everyday, it seems like we need to find a way to bring the nectar of spiritual teachings into the slog, into the the grind. And I'm grateful for that reminder.
Yeah The whole mindfulness thing, because I choose to believe this, along with Theodore Parker and Martin King, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And so as we bring mindfulness and art and conversation to our kids, and we're really present with them, as we bring it to our partners, and find out how they talk about stuff, because we frequently are linked up with people who aren't exactly the way we are. And so I'm just a great talker, and Edie communicates more through art and cooking. Mm-hmm. But it is to begin to develop the vision to see how people say I love you. Religiously, if we think about the concept of eternity, if there is such a thing as eternity, we're in it, because eternity is in all directions, up and down, and north, south, east, west, and in multiple dimensions that we don't even understand. And the time is always now. It's always now. And if we can invite ourselves to a kind of mindfulness in the now, whatever's going on. That's, I believe, what the universe is asking of us and giving us the opportunity to do. And when we're present in the now with other people, with our kids, oh man, they will remember it. Now, my dad was a talker and a philosopher, and was present with, I mean, he was magnificently imperfect, and did some stuff that was really painful and hurtful. And he had all kinds of PTSD from growing up in the Depression and then World War II. Having said all that, he was so present for me, unforgettable conversations at all times. And my mom, not so much, but she made me with her hands a little cowboy shirt that she embroidered. I still have it. It's present with me, that cowboy shirt. But I was enveloped in her love as a little boy and as a high school kid with the work of her hands. And then, of course, I was nourished by her tremendous cooking and by her music. She didn't talk, but at night, when I was a little boy, we had an organ. She was an organist and a cellist, and she'd play the organ at night when I was going to sleep. And she held me with that music. So when we're present with our kids, it touches them. They will remember. They'll never forget. It'll be in them. And when we're present with other people, and that's the communion. That's what we're here for. And absolutely, some work is harder than others. If it's your gift, you don't mind giving it, and you want to. Yeah, we want to have a place to share where we can say, okay, here's what I bring to the circle. Here's my offering.